these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Ladies and gentlemen, very special episode today because we have our former Texas Governor, Rick Perry, here. Not just Texas Governor, but also former Secretary of Energy under Donald Trump. Mr. Secretary, would you like me to call you Mr. Governor or Secretary?
Oh, not even close. Don't ever get confused about which one's a better title.
Governor.
Yeah, Secretary, nice title, but I was governor for 14 years. As a matter of fact, other than, I guess, probably husband and father, the longest title period of time that I had a title was governor, 14 years.
Now, a lot of people know that. A lot of people know your time under Trump, but I'm not sure everybody knows about your prior military service. We were sort of chit-chatting before we started recording on you landed on a carrier, but maybe walk us through military service, where you grew up and how you ended up running for governor.
Well, it's an interesting story. I'm going to go talk to a group of 20-year-olds tomorrow in Dallas about running for office. And one of the questions I almost always get asked is, why did you get involved in public service?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably true for you, for a lot of people. There was somebody in your life that really influenced you. In my case, it was my father, who was a B-17 tail gunner in 1944 and 45, flew 35 missions over Nazi-held Germany.
Wow.
Came home and took care of his family, and he became a member of the school board. He became a county commissioner. He was elected 7 times as a county commissioner back out in West Texas, where I grew up in Haskell County. So I saw my father in his actions, and I saw it in his words to me as he wanted me to make sure that I, went and was a Boy Scout and worked to get my Eagle Scout. And my Scoutmaster, he was in the military. He was with Patton's Third Army. He was class of 1932 at Texas A&M.
Really?
He proselyted me to go to A&M, so the reason I went there. He was the superintendent of the Sunday school, and he was the president of the school board. So I saw these people that I admired. My dad, my Scoutmaster, and they were both in the military and then in public service as they came back home, in both cases elected office in some form or fashion. So that's a really important thing to understand about, look at those people that you admire. It's one of the reasons that, Dan, you and others like you, our friend Jake Ellzey, who's a United States Congressman now, men and women who have been in the military, then gone on to understand that America's great because we have this volunteerism in our DNA, that we love our country, we love our community, we love our state. And we want to give back to it. So
we have a nonprofit culture too that's very unique. I mean, when you say volunteerism, that's not some spiritual sense. You mean it practically too, because we give more to church, we give more to nonprofits than any other country. Yeah. So it's really part of the DNA.
Yeah, and it's one of the things you asked about. I went to school at Texas A&M. Vietnam War was going on. I volunteered to in my case, go fly for the United States Air Force.
Were you in the Corps?
I was in the Corps Cadets 4 years at A&M. And so, we were a pipeline straight into...
I don't have many regrets in life, but not going to A&M is one of them.
Yeah.
My parents met there.
It was a great school and has a wonderful culture, still does. My daughter went there as well. But the point is being able to find that path. And listen, you don't have to join... I tell young people today, I said, just find the place you're comfortable. It may be the Marine Corps, it may be the Peace Corps, or anything in between. It may be in your church. It may be in that 501c3 that you have out there that's a nonprofit that you're passionate about. But go find that thing that you're passionate about. And the kids asked me, so why'd you get in public service? And I want to tell this second part of this because I think it's it's important for people to understand as well. It's a little, from my perspective, a little bit humorous, but so public service, going and doing that, and the satisfaction that you get. You're proud of being a Navy SEAL. I'm proud of being an Air Force pilot. I'm proud of the work that I did in the state of Texas, whether it was a state representative, the agriculture commissioner, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of energy. I've just lived this incredibly blessed life. But the second reason I tell these young people that they will get into public service, and it's okay, this is okay, is the roar of the crowd. When Dan Crenshaw steps out on the stage and people are cheering and clapping and going on and giving you their approval, that's a powerful stimulant. I mean, that's an incredibly powerful stimulant, and nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But it's a powerful thing, and it's an okay thing. I say the Rolling Stones are on tour again, right?
Yeah.
What are they, 80 years old? They don't need the money.
Easily, yeah.
It's the roar of the crowd. When Mick Jagger steps on that stage and there's 75,000 people, the Klieg lights are on, it's a powerful stimulus. Here's the caution light to a 20-year-old who's considering this. Don't let the roar of the crowd change your philosophical foundation.
Right.
There's too many people who will change their political position to
get more
allow
roars.
the roar of the crowd to be there for them, rather than, you know what, here's what I believe, and I am not going to change my philosophical position just so that you'll think that you'll approve of me.
And
there's too much of that out there in the world today.
And that's such a good point. And I want to extrapolate something from that point, but then I want to get more details on your military service after that. But what I guess the way I would describe what you just said is look, you can have a crowd and you can be telling them, we need to be against witchcraft. Witches are bad, okay? And we all agree that witchcraft is bad. And the crowd cheers and you're like, God, we're doing really well here. We're doing really well. We're on a good path because, witches are bad. But then the crowd says, this lady's a witch. And you're like, I know she's not a witch. I know that's not a real witch. And now you have a choice. Do you rile up the crowd and say, that's right, she's a witch, let's burn her at the stake? Or do you actually tell them the truth?
Yeah.
And say, whoa. We're against witchcraft, but that's not witchcraft. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to earn the scorn of the crowd because you tell them the truth? Because look, one of the quickest ways to disappoint and anger a crowd is to attack their illusions.
Yeah.
And it's a scary thing. And there's people who are way too power hungry in politics who will indeed agree and say, that's a witch. That's a witch. Get her to, and get the next one, and get the next one.
And I'll give you an example. I've seen in I've been in public service now in an elected office since 1984 when I was elected to the State House. So approaching 40 years. And that during that period of time, I've seen people, for instance, who were at one point in their life, political life, they were pro-life, and particularly on the Democrat side of the ledger, they literally changed to pro-choice so that they would maybe be selected to a position that had opened up. We see the same thing.
And I'm sure the opposite is true.
And absolutely, you've seen people who, not because they have a core foundation of a belief, they're saying to the electorate what they think the electorate wants to hear. Yep. Number one, I hope the electorate is wise enough to understand that these people that will change their position for whatever the political expediency of the day is, if they'll change their mind over that, they'll change their mind on anything. So there is no core. It's why I really look for people. And listen, if you can explain to me with great satisfaction to me why you're changing your position, well, please do that.
Reason your way through it. Yeah.
But just to change your position to be able to win an election, no, thank you. I'm not interested in those people.
No, not at all. One of the reasons, and I talked to Jocko about this, had him on the podcast yesterday, and we were talking about what military service might bring to Congress. Because I get asked that question all the time. I get asked to talk about it all the time. And I wasn't always sure what the right answer was, because I don't want to just give some boilerplate, well, we know what service is, et cetera, no real service to this country. What I've come up with, and what I think is generally true, it's obviously not true of everybody, everybody's an individual, but what is generally true of the veterans I observe in Congress is they do seek truth. They want to at least have a well-reasoned argument in front of them before they go out and say it. They feel embarrassed by saying something that isn't true. And there are plenty of politicians that feel no embarrassment whatsoever for saying things that are untrue. Either they're ignorant or they're liars. I'm not sure which it is.
Or both.
Usually both. I mean, I think it becomes like they know they're lying, but then they convince themselves of it. So it becomes some form of ignorance, I suppose, but chosen ignorance. It's a strange deal. But okay, tell us about your time in the Air Force, and how did that lead to? What's the stepping stone to governor? I'm curious at that, and I bet the 20-year-olds you're going to talk to tomorrow are curious about it.
So, 1970, I decide that my path forward is to volunteer to be in the United States Air Force. I want to be a pilot. I applied to get a contract, which I do, and finish my time at A&M in 1972. I have a pilot training slot in Big Spring, Texas, Webb Air Force Base. I go through the year of 53 weeks, as we refer to it, very intensive training, and I graduate in October of 73, get my silver wings, and head off to fly a tactical airlift, C-130, which you've probably been out of the back of more times than you'd like to
I love
count.
jumping out of the back of that. That's one of my favorite things.
we were straight up TAC airlift outfit, lived all over the world, and it was a great blessing for me, a boy who was we weren't poor. We didn't have anything. We grew up on a dry land cotton farm 16 miles from the closest place that had a post office in Paint Creek, Texas, and in a house that didn't have running water until I was 6 or 7 years old. And but again, we weren't poor. We raised our own chickens and had our eggs in our garden and raised a beef, and so had a Shetland pony and a dog. I mean, I was the happiest kid. Lived a long way from anybody out in the country, but I loved it. Great place to grow up. And so I didn't know much about the world, though. I left Texas maybe 2 or 3 times my whole life until I was 24 years old, and I became a member of a rotational squadron that literally lived all around the world. We would base out of RAF Mildenhall. We would base out of Frankfurt. I lived in 1976 for almost 60 days in Saudi Arabia and Dhahran. In 76, obviously a very different country then. But here's my point, Dan. It's when I had my first epiphany about how great this country is. I got to see how other people lived. I got to see and made the connection between these people's happiness and the form of government they had. I lived in places that had monarchies and dictatorships and different types of democracies, and I made the connection. And Saudi Arabia is a great example of it. They were just making the transition from a Bedouin Indian lifestyle to this mega wealthy country, and a lot of them were still living in tents, and but they all had a Mercedes car, right?
Yeah.
A asphalt 2-lane road with no center stripes. I mean, but they were not happy. I sensed it in the people, and I thought about their lifestyle. I would go to other countries and see either the happiness or the lack thereof, and I recognized how blessed we are to live in this country, to have the form of government we have, that we are unique beyond imagination. And so that had a powerful impact on me from the standpoint of making me understand how wonderful this country is. I think, America first, the good thing. I think loving your country and knowing that America is the greatest place in the world. Are we perfect? No, but we're the greatest place in the world. And to allow anybody to tear that down or to besmirch that really offends me. And I think it's probably out of either ignorance or they've got an agenda that's different, certainly, than mine. And so as we go through that in the world today, I try to express to young people, if you get the chance to live outside this country, please do it. If you get the chance to serve your country, it's a great and wonderful calling. If you find that place that you can go volunteer your time, either in our country or certainly outside the country for a year or two, go do it. And you will come to appreciate America so much. So, Vietnam War, switch gears on you just a second. Vietnam War came to a close in '75, and I'd done my part, and I volunteered. I did not go to Vietnam, but my commanders didn't send me there. I traveled mostly in the European theater, some down in South America, and got to see a lot of the world. And in '76, I was finishing up a rotation and decided that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but making a career out of the military wasn't it. So I took a program that allowed me to leave, and I went back to the farm and kind of figured God would point me in the right direction at some particular point in time.
And then that time comes where that direction becomes politics. So
it was interesting, and so I left the military 28th day of February 1977. My birthday's the 4th of March, so I turned 27 4 days
good
later.
Month to be born,
and
my birth month as well.
There you go. So I moved back in with my mom and dad. You talk about some kind of a strange deal. I'd been an aircraft commander, a captain in the United States Air Force, flying around the world in a multi-million-dollar aircraft. They trusted me enough to take a crew literally around the world and bring it back. And I moved back into my old room. I literally had my football number still on the door, had the all-star football game program still stapled onto the poster board. And I'm like, oh, what have I done? And, my dad still thought I was a 17-year-old kind of dummy that had left. And, my dad hadn't gone to college, so how smart could he be, right? So 6 months of really struggling with trying to figure out, did I make the right decision? During that period of time, my dad became substantially smarter and wiser because I recognized what this man was all about, what he was capable of, what he had done. And he recognized that his 17-year-old kind of dummy, kid who had gone off and now become a man, a mature, capable individual. And a couple of years later, he and I become partners. My dad became my best friend. We farmed and ranched together for the next 14 years. And my dad was a county commissioner, so I saw public service. I got involved in going to political events. There was a man who ran for Congress. I helped him. I said, this is kind of interesting. Yeah. And that was the catalyst which a lot of young people, they're intrigued with this. Do they want to do it? And I recommend to them, go find somebody that you admire, go work for them, go assist them, see if you like this. Yeah. And in some cases, it will be a lifelong pursuit, both as an avocation or a vocation.
Do you think it's a good idea to recommend to young people to do something else outside? If you ever want to run, if you ever want to run for office, because this is my recommendation, just openly, is you should do something else. If you're interested in politics at a young age, I like that, but keep it as a hobby. Go volunteer, do some things. If you make a career out of it and you want to run someday, you're part of the swamp that you say you're fighting against, right? You're part of that establishment, and not necessarily. Some very good people came up that way that I think are very respectable.
I think it,
but I would always recommend, hey, go do something else.
Yeah, it's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And in anything in life, listen, you don't. I want to be a doctor, so we don't just open up the door and say, okay, here's a scalpel and here's a stethoscope, knock yourself out. And training and experience is really important. You need to have, in most cases, and let's say, I'm going to use myself as an example here. Now, I was 33 years old before I made the decision that I wanted to be involved in elected politics. I started 5 years before, helping that congressional candidate run. So at 28 years old, I was out learning some of the political things, educating myself about the going to political conventions, the state convention. So I got elected to the State House of Representatives. I stayed there for 6 years. I was on the Appropriations Committee. I was on the Calendars Committee. I was on the Energy Committee. I learned those committees and the sectors that they oversaw. In 1990, I had the opportunity to run for Agriculture Commissioner. It was part of my experience in life. I was an animal science major from Texas A&M. I'd been my father's partner in the farm and ranch, so agriculture was a normal, I think, thing for me to go into. I served there for 8 years, was the lieutenant governor for a short period of time, 2 years, and then elected governor. So I was very well prepared.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I was the most well prepared person to be governor of the state of Texas, but that may be the fact. If you look back at all the history of the people, I stayed there an awfully long time, like 2.5 times longer than the longest person had ever served in that role before. So the people of the state of Texas, they saluted and said, "Perry, we like your style, we like your philosophy, we like the way you're dealing with the things that face this state." And I think in a way they were saying, and we like that you learned through the years, you came up through the ranks. It's like a corporate CEO.
Yeah. Do you think voters still appreciate that? Because it certainly seems now, this seems like a recent phenomenon in politics where experience is not something that voters seem to care about as much as you would think they would.
And a lot of times the electorate gets driven by rhetoric. And, I always tell folks, please just take a deep breath and
think about how somebody's experiences might inform their judgment.
Yeah.
It's
Take a
easy.
deep breath.
It's easy to tell
Think
people what they
about
want to
this.
hear.
Yeah. Look at, you wouldn't hire somebody to be, to run your business if they didn't have experience. I mean, I think that's it's one of the reasons that I talked about Donald Trump the way I talked about Donald Trump when he was running for office. This guy was a CEO. He's a tough business guy. He understood the rough and tumble of the development world in New York City. I got to think, it's a pretty tough hombre, so to speak. And I think that's really important. Whether you're picking somebody to be your state representative, your state senator, your congressman, your United States senator, you wouldn't hire someone to run your business with no experience. So why would you ask somebody to go to Congress to go be a state senator that had no experience?
Yeah. But it's a thing now, and I think that Democrats really opened the door with their squad.
Yeah. Well, that's a great, it's a good point. Listen, I choose my team to play for, and I've chosen the Republican Party to be on that team. And generally speaking, we try to send people that are very experienced, have a lot of life's experiences there, because the rest of the world's kind of watching, the rest of the country's kind of watching. And so I look up there and I go, do I want AOC or Omar, or do I want Dan Crenshaw and Jake Elsey? and so, and particularly in a time when our military, I think, has to really make some decisions about what direction are we going to go. Yeah. With all of this wokeness that we see, distilling down through government at this particular point in time. The military needs to be about keeping our country free, safe, defending liberty. It doesn't need to be a social experiment. And so I think it's so important to have people like you and Jay Kelsey sitting in those committees when the Secretary of Defense, or for that matter, the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs comes in and sits in front of you. And because of these extraordinary life experiences that you've had, and men and women like you, and in most cases they're on the Republican Party. I know there's a few veterans on the Democrat side, but by and large, these are Republican and are in Congress. And I think it's so important for the next generation of warfighter to have somebody like you, Dan Crenshaw, like Jay Kelsey, like these individuals who have had these experiences in the Congress, asking the hard questions.
People who know how to think. I mean, this is one of the things that happens a lot on this happens on both sides. It's people have trouble discerning the information that's placed in front of them. It sends people down rabbit holes. And again, it goes back to the witchcraft analogy that I made. You can either say, oh yeah, that rabbit hole, that's where you need to be looking.
Yeah.
I know it'll get a cheer.
Yeah.
I know it'll get me more followers. I know it'll get me more clicks.
Yeah.
And that makes me popular in this day and age. And I call constantly that the only people that can reverse this are the American people. Got to stop incentivizing that kind of disingenuous, illogical, and untruthful behavior, which is fundamentally what it is. But it's a reality TV show, and that's what we're kind of living in. Back to your long term as governor. So what do you think about this? This is kind of changing the direction of the questions a little bit. What do you think about the structure that Texas has with term limits and whatnot? And what
we don't have term limits
exactly.
and I've been against term limits from the get-go. There may have been a time in my early years, and this is a great example of your point that you make about experience. It's kind of like, you could stand up and say, I'm for term limits, and the crowd show, back there, kick the SOBs out. Well, wait a minute. And here's my point. If you do your job, electorate, if you pay attention, why would you send a CEO away from your business after 8 years who had taken your corporation to the highest levels, the most profitability it ever had in its life, because of some arbitrary line that got drawn there by somebody that said, 8 years is as long as you should serve? That's my point. And when you really step back and think about it, you go, you got a point there, Perry. That makes sense.
Everybody gets it once you explain it. Because like the way I do this to crowds is I'm like, look, I'm for term limits only because you are. And this is the one sort of populist stance that I'll take, because I'm not going to come out strongly against them because you guys will skewer me, but I'm going to say that to you out loud.
Yeah, but people like me can say it, and people like me should say it because of my experience that I've had in the world. I was the governor of the state of Texas for 14 years. We had one of the, if not the most successful run, whether it was the job creation, the people that moved here, the reputation that occurred, and that's not arguable. There may be some people that want to go, "Well, Perry, you had this, or you did this, or you were, but the facts are just what I said. And one of the reasons that we were able to do that and be as successful is because I was the governor at the helm, guiding the state for those 14 years. And so here's what people need to also hear. One of the reasons we were successful is we don't have term limits in the state of Texas. We had this stable leadership. And in Washington, D.C., the bureaucracy is in control. Yep. And that's your choice. I mean, like it or not, here's your choice. You can either say, you know what, we're not for term limits, and we'll decide if somebody gets out of line. And the fact is, that's how it's supposed to work. If you get a congressman or a state senator who's just absolutely a ne'er-do-well, or they make really bad decisions, go vote them out.
Well, when people don't realize the average term of a congressman is about 7-8 years. It's a little longer for a senator,
Yeah.
but it's not long. Obviously there's some exceptions, been there for 40 years, but go talk to their voters if you don't like it. And you're absolutely right. It's the bureaucracy, it's the staff, and the administrative state.
So
that
your
win out.
choice is this, Dan. You can either be against term limits or you're for the bureaucracy, because that's actually your choice. If you put term limits into place, the bureaucrats sit back and go, "Oh yes, sir, Mr. Crenshaw, I'll get right on that."
Right.
Wink and nod,
100%.
knowing that
Yeah,
you
you're
ain't
right.
going to be there in 8 years. I'm still going to be here, and I'm going to be running this thing. So I'm not for the bureaucracy. They've already got too much power, in my opinion. The deep state is real. I saw it in Washington, D.C. It is real. They don't like people like me and you. They want to run things themselves. They're up there with their hands on the lever. Now, they may let you touch the lever every now and then, but
So let's talk about that then as your time as Secretary of Energy and what it's. First, let's define what the deep state really is, because I think some people think it's this sort of centralized conspiracy, and I don't think it's that. I don't think that's necessarily what you're referring to. It's more like a entrenched bureaucracy that, by its very nature of being a bureaucracy, is indeed self-serving. And self-perpetuating. It's exactly what you would expect because it's human nature and it's a human-led organization.
it's not a conspiracy. It's just, it's a reality.
Yeah.
And the reality is that through the years, the bureaucracy have put in their protections. They have put things into statute or into regulation that keep the public somewhat at arm's length.
Mhm.
A little bit of hide the ball, a
Right.
little bit of don't pay attention to the little man over here behind the curtain. Look over here. That all goes on. I consider that to be part of politics. But in Washington, D.C., because, for instance, it's really hard to fire somebody. A great example.
Yeah.
Can I give you a really great example
That's
of
such a
this?
simple.
Let me back up to, in the Obama administration, we had people literally dying at the VA hospitals. Obama recognized that was a real problem for him. What did he do? He fired the VA secretary. Remember, I think it was Shinseki. He fired him and said, have to have a head, a scalp here. So you're out, and we're going to replace you. We're going to come back in. And Congress was beside itself. I want to say they passed like $16.8 billion to go redo the VA, to get the dollars in there. We're going to go find. Obama's a smart guy. I mean, I'm going to tell you, he was a very wily political operative. And so he's like, okay, I need a little protection on this thing. I'm going to go find a Republican, West Pointer, 82nd Airborne, 30 years as a corporate CEO to run the VA. I mean, you like the sound of that? Man, heck yeah.
Mm.
And Congress is going to give him this substantial amount of money and pretty much carte blanche to go do the things that need to happen, up to and including you can remove people.
Mhm.
As I recall, that was about in 2012, 13, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And nothing happened, right? Let me tell you why. Because the deep state's real. And the deep state got concerned. They looked around. They went and met with Valerie Jarrett and said, Miss Jarrett, this guy's fixing to come in here and we're going to get all fired. He's going to bring, and I don't know this, I'm speculating, but I bet the conversation went something like this. You guys don't worry about this.
Yeah.
We'll take care of this.
Yeah.
Y'all just keep doing
It's
what
all
you're doing.
politics. Let them do it publicly, but then when
And as
when
far
it
as
comes down to
I
it,
know,
slow rolling.
Nobody got fired and nothing changed at the VA. And that was a tragedy. We had the opportunity, but the Obama administration, the Democrats, are so beholden to the bureaucracy, to those unions, and American citizens were not served well. And that's the reason that you need experience. That's the reason a guy like you needs to stay in Congress for a while. That's a reason a guy like Jake Elsie and you other men and women who understand the experience, the cost of public service, to go in and really cajole and to harangue, whether it's the Secretary of the Veterans Administration or whether it's the Secretary of Defense or whether it's the Secretary of State, that we've got to have these things done. And here's the authority to do it, and we expect you to manage your agency this way. I think that's so important. And if you don't have that experience, you can get up and, run your mouth all you want and say, well, but nobody pays attention to you because you don't have the experience.
Can I zero in on the firing of people? Because that's such a simple solution that people can zero in on when we talk about the deep state. It's easy to yell and scream about the deep state and it gets our side all riled up and everybody's like, ah! But, it takes a little bit more thoughtfulness to say, well, this is exactly how we would tackle it and what it means. And the ability to fire federal workers is an important one because now, this is what I want to ask, because it sounds like that legislation was passed to make it easier to fire people, but it still takes an executive branch to actually fire them.
Yes.
And so those firings did start happening, though, under Trump. As far as I understand it. Is that correct? I don't know how many people got fired. I do know the VA has slowly improved.
Yeah.
I use the VA. I can see today because I went and got eye surgery at the Houston VA.
I used the VA while I was there at Walter Reed. That's part of the. I suspect it's part of the. It's part of the government healthcare system that the VA
but
would be.
The same changes that Congress made to the VA, is that something Congress should do federal agency wide? Because we've got to make it easier to
Let me cut to an issue that I care about a lot, and that's veterans' mental health. I think the federal government has absolutely failed monumentally dealing with the issue of veterans' mental health. We were at war for nearly 2 decades. Post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury at levels that we had never seen before, but partly because we were in this never-ending war.
Mm-hmm.
I visited Brooks Medical Army Center multiple times as the governor of the state of Texas. I had dear friends who came back and who had served, some who had been injured that were there. I saw way too many kids who became addicted to opioids because the federal government had failed our military men and women so bad. And so why are we not addressing that now? How long do we have to see 20 of our servicemen and women killing themselves every day?
Well, this is a good example of the bureaucracy fighting against this. So, and I know you're familiar with how hallucinogenics have been used, the psychedelics have been used to treat PTSD, drug addiction, whatever it is. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on this. We do a healthcare summit, a healthcare innovation summit every year here in Houston. And this last year we brought on some doctors that had quite a bit of experience administering MDMA, which is Molly or ecstasy. Yeah. And of course, in a controlled environment with a therapist there to
proper dosing. Proper diagnosis, prior dosing, proper guiding through these experiences, and proper follow-up. Those are the 4 things that we see with that.
And we had an amendment to require the DOD to at least start the pilot programs on this. And they were very, very hesitant. They fought it pretty hard. It never made it in. I think next time around, we need to get some Democrats on board who are in favor of this too. I don't think we did a good job on our end garnering the support we needed. It was sort of a last minute idea that I wanted to throw in there. It didn't work. But I'm also still trying to get Space Force to use Navy ranks, but I don't know if that makes you mad as an Air Force guy, but I think it's obvious that
I think we're all on the same team.
Yeah, I think Space Force should be using Navy ranks. You can't have a colonel of a starship, right? It's got to be obviously a captain. Anyway, different subject. Admiral. It can't be a general of the Starfleet. Got to be admiral of the Starfleet. It just makes sense. So we have fun with those. But anyway, the point is the bureaucracy was very opposed to it because it means more work and more risk. people get it wrong a little bit. These people aren't evil, but
It's just easier to
they
say
like
no.
but they like 9 to 5 simple checking of boxes. They will fight you if you want them to do anything
And
else.
if I say yes and something happens,
Mhm.
they'll come back and I'm the one that gets in trouble.
Well, this is probably something you get. I'm sure you deal with as Secretary of Energy. The EPA deals with this constantly, which is this sort of weaponizing of the courts that happen when we want to build things. We want to build energy infrastructure. We want to build a pipeline. We want to build a highway. It is so easy in this country to weaponize the court system and stop any kind of development and progress right in its tracks.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is, and I've done a lot of podcasts on it.
And because the weaponization of the legal system in our country should put everybody on edge. Whether it's using the legal system to go after you because I don't agree with your politics, and that's basically what you're talking about here. We're going to use the legal system. We're going to weaponize the legal system to stop this project because we don't agree with it.
Mhm.
And so it's. And I'm highly concerned about. One of the things that we did when I was governor in 2003, we passed the most sweeping tort reform in the nation.
Yep.
And I
This is
I
well known for that.
completely respect people who choose personal injury trial law as their profession. They're bright, they're capable, they're
Sometimes it is indeed a form of justice.
and
I mean,
it
we
is
can't deny
really
that.
important that you have those types of bright, capable individuals when the innocent, the lesser of our society have been wronged, to have Big Brother up there to stand up and to fight for them and to win for them. And I love that and I want that. But finding the right balance is really important, and not letting a faceless, soulless, not electable bureaucracy making those decisions and using our legal system against us is a real caution flag that Americans should be pushing back on.
Let's talk about the Department of Energy. What do you oversee as Secretary of Energy? Just in layman's terms.
It was an interesting, when President-elect Trump asked me to be the Secretary of Energy, he knew me from my 14 years of being
Had you
governor.
guys known each other?
Oh, yeah.
Of you, or
I've
did
been-
you know each other?
I've been in his office a number of times back in 2010, 2011. And then obviously we ran against each other in 2015. So
Yeah.
as he reminds people on a regular basis, I said some pretty mean, nasty stuff about him. And I remind him, I said, Mr. President, you gave as good as you took. So, and we had a good, he and I both get it about the political nature. It's not beanbag, it's hardball. I ran against him in 2015. He vanquished me. I came on board and helped him a great deal. I hope I know he thinks that. But he asked me to be his Secretary of Energy. And he'd be the first guy, if he was sitting here with us in this podcast, to say, I didn't know everything there was to know about the Department of Energy, and neither did I. But he said, Perry, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go be the Secretary of Energy, and you go do for American energy what you did for Texas. I got it, Mr. President. I know what you're looking for. And he was looking for, a CEO that would come in and free up the energy side of things from overtaxation, overregulation, go sell American energy around the world, which is what we did. But that's a small part of the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
The nuclear weapons
Mm-hmm.
belong to the Department of
Yeah, that's something a lot of people don't realize. The warheads, the missiles belong to the military. The warheads are
the DOD.
DOE.
The DOD is the delivery system.
Right.
The DOE, they manufacture them, they build them, they modernize them, they keep them. One of the largest amounts of nuclear material in the world is in Amarillo, Texas, at a place called Pantex, which is a national lab that belongs to the Department of Energy. 17 national labs across the country. Los Alamos, where the Manhattan Project was done. Hanford, Washington is home to Pacific Northwest Lab up there. Idaho National Lab, which is where the grid dealing with all the cybersecurity is being dealt with. There's Livermore, where some extraordinary work's done on light and laser work, and I mean, just it is the most interesting job I ever had. Not the best job, that was governor, but the most interesting job I ever had was the Department of Energy. 17 national labs that are involved in the most high-tech, every supercomputer that the U.S. government has, the Department of Energy has. You know, I think we were like of the top 10 supercomputers in the world when we took over. The U.S. had number 3, number 8. The Trump administration increased the funding for supercomputers, the DOE, by 45% in our first round. The president was really committed to our technological advancement. And before I left, we had number 1, number 3, number 5, I think, and number 10. So we really moved back to the number 1 position in supercomputing, on our way to quantum computing. And so fascinating stuff going on at that agency. It's dealing with everything from battery storage to cybersecurity, obviously modernizing our weapons so that we quit doing underground testing in 1992, I believe. So those supercomputers are very important for modeling these reactions, these explosions. So it just incredibly. So I'm going to finish with this. North Korea, as the conversations with North Korea, the potential denuclearization of the peninsula. The first people into North Korea, DOE employees.
Jeez, what's the future of North Korea? America hasn't been talking about North Korea for
Isn't
a long
it interesting
time.
that we haven't even heard the name of Kim Jong?
Isn't that it? It is interesting, and I can't even place my finger as to why. I mean, that they haven't been very loud. That's one reason, and at a certain point, everybody sort of accepts the status quo as long as nobody's getting killed. Now, of course, North Koreans are getting killed every day from starvation and gulags and whatnot.
We've talked about all of this, and I know we didn't want to get too much into the political weeds, but one of the reasons I think it's so important to have experienced men and women sitting in the United States Congress is the world that we live in today is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
If all you've ever done is sit back here in a place in Texas and been involved in a political process, I don't think that's a good background, a good platform, a good foundation for you to have with the challenges that we have in the world today. It's why things that you boys and girls saw as you traveled around the world, as you interacted, the military, I happen to think, I'm biased about this, but I think the military is one of the broadest graduate programs that you can go into because you get exposed to so many different things. You get exposed to international, you get exposed to the national defense, you get exposed to some incredible technologies that are out there. And all of that packaged together is just, again, I'm biased, but I think a very, very good foundation for somebody to go serve in the United States Congress.
In perspective and an understanding of the threats, the world's a dangerous place, as you noted. And this is something I talk about on this podcast a lot, especially in the wake of Afghanistan. There's a very emotional reaction now. And there's always been that emotional reaction from the left, but a very emotional reaction from the right on any kind of foreign policy, it seems. And because what is created is this false dichotomy between doing nothing or all-out war, nation building. And people cannot seem to take a step back and say, look, there's a lot of options in between that.
a lot.
We don't need to be making dumb decisions. I agree with that. And look, I think a lot of people would agree that if you could turn back the hands of time, probably should not have gone into Iraq. Afghanistan's a different story. I think we had to do that, and everybody agreed.
Yeah, but I'll take that one just another step, if you don't mind, Dan. Here's my observation. I wrote a letter a week from 2003 until 2010 to a Texas family that lost a loved one every week for over 8 years, or right at 8 years. That was a hell of a cost. Not to mention the trillions of dollars that got expended in that part of the world. Let's just talk about Afghanistan a second. Would we have been better off had we just sat down and said, hey, Northern Alliance, here's $50 million. We're going to give it to you every year. You got some bad guys that are over there, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, that are trying to do some bad stuff over there. Will you take care of them for us? And my bet is they would have said, absolutely. Was it $50 million? Was it $70 million? I mean, somewhere in that range. I'll bet you could have gotten done what you needed to get done without this massive footprint that we put in there. If there was some work that needed to be done that required some special type people who could go in and do things at night with, really high tech, we'll come help you and do that. But let's just keep this place stable and not let the bad guys use it as a base of operation. If we'd done that for 20 years, not maybe, I know the outcome wouldn't be any different than it is today. And there would be trillions of dollars less money spent. And I know a lot less great American patriots' lives would still be alive today. I look at it as we've got to be smart about how we deal with these challenges around the world. One of the reasons, again, I'm biased, I think President Trump understood this better than anybody that had come before him, that America does not need to be big footprint, trying to make democracy out of places that haven't been democracy ever in their life. I mean, Alexander the Great, the best I can tell, high-centered in Afghanistan 2,000 years ago.
Afghanistan's a particularly bad place to try and govern.
Yes.
Iraq, again, I think the premise of Iraq was weaker than the premise for going to Afghanistan. So
I don't disagree with
it. It is a bit apples and oranges. But what I mean is Iraq is more governable, and we actually succeeded in governing at great cost. And again, is that cost worth it? That will forever be a historic question. Afghanistan is really not governable. The cities, yes, the cities are much more modern. You can govern them, and we basically ended up at the point that you're talking about, where we had in the last 6 years in Afghanistan, had this very small, very low cost footprint that was working for us. And my consternation was, why would you rip out the rug from under that? This is the low cost option we've been looking for, the non-nation building option we've been looking for. We finally got to it, and we just threw it all away. Because hindsight's 2020, right? I mean, I could probably agree with you that a more tailored approach would have been, which would have been better after 9/11. But it's hard. But it's hard for me to go back and judge the people who were making those decisions at the time.
Correct.
These aren't stupid people.
I get that.
No.
But the point is, going forward, I hope that our experience, and I get back to that word again, Dan, having life's experiences is invaluable. Whether it's the doctor that's fixing to do the surgery on you, whether it's the person sitting in the front left seat of that airliner that's fixing to fly you halfway around the world, or whether it's the individual that's going to go to Congress to represent you.
Well, here's a more modern question then, dealing with Vladimir Putin right now and the Ukraine and what they're thinking of doing. They're amassing troops on the border of Ukraine. I don't think anybody in the U.S., I don't think any politician is talking about going to war with Russia over this.
I hope not.
And but a lot of people are talking about sanctions. Looking at the Nord Stream pipeline, for instance. I mean, and even and this is what I went before. What I think people have gotten really emotional about any kind of foreign policy, any kind of pushing, because you got people from our side saying, no, that's warmongering. I'm like, is it though? Yeah. I mean, you can freeze the guy's bank accounts. It's not exactly warmongering, right? You do have to deter at some point, because the less you deter, you will end up with war.
Absolutely. I think using diplomacy, using economic sanctions is the wise way to go. We saw it with President Trump.
Yeah, he sent a bunch of offensive weapons to Ukraine.
And he really throttled some people in Moscow and hurt them economically. He stopped literally in the tracks the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I mean, those are issues that I worked on as a member of the National Security Council. He was right. We were getting, Iran's a great example. I mean, we had Iran on their knees, and now they're probably knocking on the door of being able to have a nuclear weapon, because
Trump understood very rational deterrence strategy, because he kind of sees it like a business.
That's a good term. I like that. And if people really think about what does that mean, rational deterrent actions, and it basically is a mixture of all of those things. Of, look, if you do this, we're going to do this. If you'll do this, we're going to let you do this. And all of these countries, the bulk of them, let me put it that way, there are some that are irrational, and the ones that are irrational, you got to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe
they're
they're
usually the non-state actors that are highly irrational.
Yes, sir. But you're absolutely correct. So I think this administration that we have today, not using a rational approach, is not in America's best interest.
It's a realist approach. Because what's funny is, again, I look at our side of the isolationist streak on our side, and they're like, they put Trump in that category, but Trump was never in that category. I actually think Trump's foreign policy was highly rational. It was certainly not isolationist in any respect, but it was rational and realist, and I think there's something to be said for that. I do worry people are taking that history and manipulating it a little bit.
People would do that?
Yeah, into sort of this this sort of hyper isolationist streak, because again, you know why? Because it does get a rise from the crowd. People just like to hear it, and I'm not sure why.
And on my side of it, it's like we were incredibly successful. Now, part of this is because I'm hardwired to be an economic development guy. I'm hardwired to go sell Texas, whether it's recruiting a business out of California to come to the state, or whether it was selling American LNG halfway around the world. We were making massive inroads into the European community with our liquefied natural gas. Our partners, the Poles, who I happen to think is the best friends that America has in Europe, they were being great partners. They were opening up a pipeline between Poland and Ukraine, where Russia was literally having to pay attention and to basically not be anywhere near as leaning in as they are now, relative to putting troops on the border, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think that we had this great opportunity. American energy was the greatest diplomatic tool that we had around the world. I think it still is today. It's clean natural gas that is making an impact on the climate in a positive way. It is the way to change the African nation and bring them out of ranked poverty. And this president, Trump, understood that. And he was deploying American diplomacy in the form of American energy, I think, as well as any president has done in my lifetime. You think back to World War II and what the Texas oil and gas industry did. They, if the history books would really be, spot on. There were a handful of Texans back in the early 1940s with the oil and gas that made the petroleum products available, and may have been the difference in whether or not America won that war against Germany, as we strangled the German energy and made the Allies so proficient because they had the petroleum products they needed.
So speaking of energy and energy mixes, maybe the last thing I want to ask you about is, you've been very generous with your time. Last thing I want to ask about is Texas energy grid. We were talking about that before we started recording. What does Texas need to be doing to get that mix right?
Yeah.
What mistakes did we make?
Well, we've been blessed in this state that in the 2000s, I'll just give a quick little history lesson. We became very dependent upon basically two sources of energy: coal power plants and natural gas power plants. I want to say like in 03, 04, natural gas went to like $13, $14 MCF. I mean, it got really expensive. And we're kind of like, holy mackerel, this is not a good thing. So we started looking at what were some of the alternatives, and one of the alternatives was obviously to try to come up with, is there a cleaner way to burn coal? Is there cleaner burning plants out there? And can we bring in wind energy to the state of Texas as, part of an all of the above strategy? Do we need to go look at nuclear power, expanding it? All of that was a conversation that was occurring in the 03 through 07 period of time. And we decided, and I think rightly, that one of the most efficient, quickest, and most economical was to expand the wind energy side of things. We got a lot of wind out in West Texas. So the state made the decision, you guys come and build your wind. You got some federal credits you can take care of. We'll build the transmission line. The state will build the transmission line, the CREZ lines, as they were referred to. And we did. I always thought that if we got up to 15% of our total base or the total amount of energy wind, man, what a great thing. It'd be a great economic and relatively stable way to add power to the grid. The coal thing was just not going to work, partly because of the cost, partly because of the pushback from the environmental side, and frankly, even from the natural gas producers didn't want to see that the coal. Nuclear just wasn't going to get anywhere because of the cost at that particular point in time and the stigma that nuclear had and the regulatory hurdles.
We do a lot of podcasts on how to get nuclear to be a bigger part.
And it needs to be. And we're reaching the point now. There's a company called NuScale that's worked with us up at the Idaho National Lab. Great little company. It's safe. It's walk-away safe. The waste issue goes away. You can just bolt them together. I think if you really care about the future of the planet, and you're not for micro or small modular reactors, then you got another agenda.
Right.
You don't really care about the climate. Well, you care about some political agenda that you're trying to drive
the
through.
deities of solar and wind.
So anyway, the long story short is we got so enamored with wind, and I was a very big supporter of it, but I was a realist that here's 15%. When you get to 15%, then because wind doesn't always blow.
Right.
Solar's becoming certainly economically close to being a real competitor, and that's a good thing. But the sun goes down every day. And what we need to be doing in this state, in my opinion, we need to have a base load of stable energy, no matter what's happening in the world. If there's a big freeze going on, or if it's 110 degrees in Dallas, Texas for 10 days in a row, it's really putting a stress on our generation capacity, that you still have this base load that can keep up with your need. Now, how do you get base load? Well, obviously nuclear is one of those. Natural gas, generally speaking, that freaky thing that happened in February when natural gas no longer was reliable as it normally is, the wind quit blowing, the wind's going to go down, the sun's going to go down every day, and it does this. There's 30 gigs of power coming on board, I think, in the next 24 months, if my memory serves me correct. This sine wave and your generation turbines and all of that, the physics of that is not friendly. And we have a potential that could be pretty devastating to the state if we don't give incentives to these companies to come in and build that stable baseload. Peaker plants, for instance, I would have laid out a plan that basically said, hey, look, you come in the state of Texas, you build those peaker plants, fuel them with natural gas, which we have a 100-year supply of, and you don't have to pay any franchise tax for the next 10 years, whatever. It's let the bean counters figure out what the right incentive is,
Right.
but give incentives to American industry, and they'll respond.
Yeah.
So I just think we kind of took our eye off of making our energy infrastructure as stable as it could be.
We're only going to have more demand in Texas, so
You're going to keep moving.
it should be obvious that we need more capacity. And if you keep adding unreliable capacity to a grid,
Yeah.
if you're lucky, it'll just increase prices. If you're unlucky,
The lights go out.
You lose power.
Yeah.
Read
We can't afford that.
in Scotland, which is 100% wind, their energy prices because the wind just isn't what they expected it to be. I don't know why they expected this best case scenario of wind every year, but they have been, and they've been disappointed, and their energy prices have gone up 50%. The only reason the lights don't go off is because then they import energy from south
And pay out
from
the
the
nose
south.
for it. Our
Right.
problem is we don't have anybody to import it to from
No.
on a stable basis. So we got our own grid, and I think that's a good thing. But we need to get back focused on how do you build the stable baseload energy. And I will suggest to you nuclear, these small modular reactors, the use of solar is fine, but you got to have peaker plants. When that sun goes down, kick those boys on, run them for 12 hours, cut them off. The technology's there. I think the ability to incentivize those are there. I hope the legislature will take a look at that and make some good decisions on that in the future.
Yeah, make some calls.
Yeah.
Governor Perry, thanks so much for being on.
Dan, it's
Great
always an
conversation.
honor to get to hang out with you, man. God bless you, and thank you for
Appreciate
your service and what you're continuing doing for our country.
Thank you.
Amen.